Fabulous. So, hello and welcome to everyone. I'm Christy. I'm from the board, and it's my great honour to be able to host today's session. Just as a reminder, we do record the meeting, and then this goes onto our video onto our website at a later date, and also onto Risto's wonderful podcast that he has too. So it is a great delight that we have our second special interest group of the year hosting, and we have our Teaching Games for Understanding team. I'm going to hand over to them to let them introduce themselves and get ourselves going on the discussion.
Lovely. Thank you. Well, I think I'm first, and my name's Alan Ovens from the University of Auckland, and my role is to contextualize the discussion a little wee bit, give a little bit of a background to the Teaching Games for Understanding movement, and I thought I'd do that by situating it within the conferences and how the special interest group emerged. So if I get my slideshow going here, and we can get underway. So we were very fortunate and privileged to be able to host the 8th International Teaching Games for Understanding Conference at the University of Auckland. And it was a very interesting exercise for us because it's post-COVID, and we got the responsibility for running it a little while ago. And so that the idea of running the conference presented a number of challenges for us. And so one of them was, how do we rebuild and strengthen the games-based teaching and coaching community after COVID? So we'd held the conference in the UK, right in the middle of the previous conference, sorry, right in the middle of COVID, and we knew that they'd really struggled. And so, how do we rebuild that? How do we grow the community around teaching games for understanding? Coupled with that was this question of, how do we design an event that provides a meaningful experience for teachers and coaches and researchers? And I think that we were really conscious that we'd been to other conferences and they were really oriented towards academics sharing their work, discussing ideas. And in order to make conferences work, we tended to be inviting a lot of coaches and teachers along, and we were aware that they didn't always get a lot of value out of it. So that was a real challenge for us, how we were going to do that. And the third one was, how do we foster some critical dialogue around this notion of game-based teaching, teaching games for understanding, and how do we advance the theoretical and practical understanding of the model and what it means for the organization. So that's kind of the background. So if I start with that third one, what do I mean by sort of like advancing the games for understanding idea? Well, if we go back a little wee way to the 1950s and 1960s, at that time there's a really interesting paradigm shift as this move towards a much more of a focusing in on the technical aspects of play. And the core idea there was really, it was believed that that a complex activity like playing a game or a sport was best learned by breaking it down and mastering its individual parts. And that's been labeled by a number of people as either I think Ines Ravino called it the molecular approach to teaching and coaching, and someone like Richard Tinning called it the demonstration, explanation, and practice model. And so, but the core idea there was that these kids are doing a lot of drills, and that also caused a lot of concern for a number of people. For many that were more oriented around a student-centered approach, there was a real worry. Students were obviously experiencing very little success in the games. They weren't really learning some of the strategies and the concepts of the games. It was obvious that they had poor decision-making skills, because often the coaches were making a lot of those decisions for them, and the kids were just sort of like little puppets out on the courts or the fields and what have you. And the students were very, in that sense, very dependent upon the coach and the teacher to make the decisions for them. And so as a response to that, and I'm just sort of filling this background because it was at that time, a number of people published different ideas. And Alan Wade's idea in sort of 1967, he published a really formative book on, using small-sided games to help people, help young kids understand the game of football. A couple of years on from that, Morden and Redfern published a book where they were starting to think about the fact that you could start to group games that were of similar style together, and that players should be able to analyze the game, and that learning should involve experimentation and inquiry and those sorts of things. So those two ideas, small-sided games and that you could group games that were very similar, were kind of fundamental, this underlying sort of idea to the molecular approach that would tended to be the hegemony that grew at the time. And this sort of culminated in the Rod Thorpe, David Bunker at Loughborough University, developing a model which they called the Teaching Games for Understanding model, which really foregrounded the idea that children should first develop an appreciation for the tactical structure of the play before teaching the technical aspects of the game. And it was that 1982 publication that was really quite significant in the field. And we can see that because around that time, and this is a graph of the frequency of usage in research literature, the published literature at the time. And you can see from this, and I know there's people listening to the podcast, as soon as it was published in 1982, it started to get, the frequency started to grow, but it was about 1995, all of a sudden it took off. And it became a very well-known model at that time within the field. And since its first appearance, it's had a lot of research done on the model, and people have understood the model from information processing and schema theory as a expression of situated learning. They've looked at it from ecological psychology and dynamical systems theory. Some people see it as a form of being able to action a constructivist approach to teaching. And most recently, people started to apply complexity theories and around that notion. So it's been sort of researched in a number of different ways. And also because of its popularity, its growing popularity, there was a number of different models. Now, not all of them were evolved from Teaching Games for Understanding, but people were playing around with those ideas. And we can see, a whole variety of different models and ideas were very similar to Teaching Games for Understanding, or based on the Teaching Games for Understanding approach. Things like tactical games, game sense, the play practice work of Alan Launder, the invasion games competency model, for instance, the tactical decision learning model, games concept approach, the clinic day, game day approach, and more recently, the work that we've done in New Zealand around the Move Well ideas. So there's this explosion of very similar type ideas in which games were central to how to structure learning for young people. In terms of the special interest group, very early on there was a interest within the teachers and researchers about how do we formalize the growing interest in Teaching Games for Understanding. And that kind of came to a head in the La Coruña conference in Spain, where Joy Butler brought together a task force, and they started to talk about some of the principles and establish a mission statement for an organization. And AIESEP agreed in 2006 to establish the Teaching Games for Understanding as a special interest group as part of AIESEP. Moving on from there, in 2010, with this objective of being able to really stretch the connection around the world, we established the International Advisory Board, the IAB, which would advise the executive committee of the special interest group and incorporate more people from around the world. in that sense, the International Advisory Board has representatives from a number of different countries on there that meet regularly. In 2021, in appreciation for this growing interest, multiple sort of models and ideas around teaching games for understanding or games, the SIG developed a statement around game-based approaches. And essentially they because at the time there was a lot of different language, but was it game-centered, was it game-based? And so the idea in the end was to publish a statement that we would use the game-based approach to refer to this learner-centered approach in which modified games set the base for developing meaningful and thoughtful, intelligent and skillful participants. And then at the conference that we just ran in Auckland, the proposal was put on the table that instead of being a special interest group organized around the model of teaching games for understanding, perhaps we should grow that name so that we better represent this diverse range of ideas. And so that's where we are at the moment, considering a name change for the special interest group. A little bit of the history, going back to 2001, there's been a number of, there's been 8 conferences and that have been quite diverse with quite very good support from different people. And then around 2006, there was also the development of the one-day pre-Congress symposia. So when the AIESEP organized a World Congress, then we had the opportunity of having one-day symposium before the Congress actually started. So you can see that in 2006, we were in Jyväskylä in Finland, we were in La Coruña in Spain, in Auckland before the 2014 World Congress, and then again in Edinburgh in Scotland. The World, our 7th international conference, which is at Worcester in UK, was right in 2020, which is right when the COVID hit, and they had a lot of trouble, and it ended up in 2022 being an online conference, and that was a really interesting opportunity for us. And as I said, we reflected on that so that by 2024 we were able to offer our conference here. So in terms of our conference in Auckland, it was a real challenge for us to think about how do we design this 4-day conference that was going to be offered to teachers, to coaches, to researchers, and provide a meaningful experience for each of them, each one of those sort of key groups. The typical program had a number of practical workshops for, say, we had a one-day workshop for teachers, and alongside that we had the academic program running. We also had a one-day workshop for coaches, as well as the academic program running at the same time. And instead of having keynotes, we decided to foster this critical discussion and debate by having a series of provocation panels that would have an idea to discuss and then engage all the participants at the conference in a broader discussion. And it was very successful. We really enjoyed, this sort of global group that came together. We had people from right around the globe, and we're really thrilled to have a number of people from the Asia Pacific region, as well as our own participants from New Zealand. Part of the conference, we also have the Len Armand Memorial Lecture to just acknowledge the work that Len Armand has done in the field, and we're really thrilled. The first one was offered by Linda at 2022, and then this year we were able to have Tim Hopper give the second one. In our provocation panels, we had 3 of them running across the 3 days, the first 3 days. So the very first one was, does TGfU still have relevance in contemporary educational contexts? and that really picked up the idea of this the development. Where are we at? And it also there was a sense in some of that discussion that the discourse around physical education has changed, and there's a movement away from games to a lot more of an orientation towards well-being and social justice themes. And so there was this question: is games and still got a place in physical education? And the second provocation panel um, dug down into that a little bit more with what outcomes should a games-based approach foster. This was a discussion really poised around, do we teach children to play games, or do we play games to teach children? And so there's an interesting juxtaposition there, because for some people, teaching games for understanding and the games-based approach is being able to build a competency base in order to be physically active and play games. For another group of people, we play games because it's just the most amazing context for teaching young people about culture, about being their social and emotional and their identity outcomes and those sorts of things. So it's a context. So there's a really interesting debate there. And then the last provocation panel was focused on our coaches, and a bit like physical education, what was interesting was that the discourse around coaching has shifted away from having a real game-centered approach to swinging back to much more of a drill-oriented type focus. And especially in New Zealand, the Sport New Zealand in particular was worried about that. And part of that was due to a sort of a loss of our high-profile coaches who often modeled game-based approaches in their coaching. And another part of it is, I suppose, just what young people see on the net a lot, and they're not really being modeled a lot of games-based coaching. What they see is, especially in the NBA and those sorts of things, a lot of drills and people just sort of, doing a lot of repetitive, isolated type stuff. And so there's been a swing back to that. So it was lovely to have Sport New Zealand support us on that and to be able to put together a really high profile panel for us to be able to debate that. And so that's me. That's a little bit of the background and setting up a context for the discussion. I can stop there and hand over to Linda.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, I appreciate the overview because much of what I'm going to say integrates into that very nicely. So thank you so much. I think one of the things that comes up to me is the things I'm supposed to address today I'm to explore and analyze, I don't know how much analyzing I'm doing at 5 o'clock in the morning, and whether the TGfU still holds relevance and what adaptations are necessary for it. So first of all, to just be on the lighter side, I do think it has relevance, but it's almost like I want to say it's time for you folks to go because I'm near the more twilight end of my career. So I see this as a reflection on what has happened, and which has been as you can see from Alan's presentation, it's been a lot, and because we have to remember how long it takes. I mean, think about how long it takes to get an institutionalized form of a game. Think of the game Ultimate. It started like in the backyard throwing a little disc around, and now it's a varsity sport in high schools in the US. So it takes a long time to make this movement, and I still think there's a movement there. I think the critical changes we've made just to make this organization and be attached to AIESEP and make it a world movement and be involved in that is a grand accomplishment. And if, we owe that germ of that to Joy Butler and the people who were around that energy at the time that we started having those conversations at Plymouth State back in the early 2000s. I do think one of the most amazing things is the change to embrace there was this, there's always going to be this debate. That's why we're academics. You don't give us all this stuff to focus on one thing and not have a critical nature about ourselves. So the idea that we've moved ourselves to a games-based approaches and opened ourselves up to say, yeah, there's multiple ways of looking at this. Alan just presented all the theoretical perspectives that have been formed around that, because it came from psychology with Rod, but it's really, the pedagogy community has embraced it as a pedagogy, and that's a whole different way of thinking about it. And so I think that that's a good thing. I think that should be seen as a strength and not a competition. So we have all these theoretical frameworks and these perspectives, and as Steve Mitchell has said at the Hong Kong conference, that there's many pathways up the mountain, and I think we need to embrace that. But I also think it shouldn't be a race to see whose mountain, when you get to the top, that we're the best, because I think we still need to keep learning from each other and using all those perspectives. And sometimes we, especially in academia, we get multiple strands, because we all have to have the thing that says our name on it and all that stuff. And maybe we need to let go of that and worry about the content that we're teaching and the perspectives that we come from. Of course, this is me talking about it 33 years later, not having to worry about getting tenure and promoted. So so those are the ones, that's something I think, the multiple perspectives. The change of the name for the special interest group is going to be an important final decisions that we make, because it is leaving a little bit of our roots, but where do we keep our roots? Because our roots were with teaching games for understanding. And then there's that debate. Do we let go of that? We don't want to lose the understanding part of it. That's a critical feature of it. And see, I just brought my border terrier so you could all have a chance to look at that when you get sick of looking at me. Let's see, I have I do believe it's still content in PE. I'm just one of those people that will never let go, and I realize that makes me very old school, because I do feel that sport is a microcosm of society, and even more so in the world we're living in. Well, in the world I'm living in right now, anyway. I think it's a hotbed of life lessons. Okay, and we can't let go of that as content. And I love the perspective that Alan brought in, is how we enter the game and how we have the perspective of how we enter the game as pedagogues. Neither of them are wrong, but we can't lose the context as a relevant way of teaching life lessons to kids. So I think one of the ways we get to this is going back to the grassroots. We've got to be at the grassroots level, a little bit more networking. I know Aspasia has goals of creating some networks around the world, because we have the 1SIG, which is awesome, but how do we reach the grassroots? While the movement is alive and well, I don't think it's getting down into the practitioners and the teachers and the kids that need that. Let's see, I have my research practice. That's the other thing. Okay, so the other thing I have to say, I just think, like, I'm just had something in a class I was teaching about developing appropriate inappropriate practice, and I'm using the standards from the US, and still in there is about mastery learning. Okay, so I'm sorry, it's not about mastery learning. It's about the learning process and what in the context of which we learn that. Kids today, things are at their fingertips with the phone and AI, and I'm not sure and I've maintained this for a long time, that we didn't teach mastery to begin with, because we don't have PE long enough in our classes. So what is it we can do? And I think it's by having this sort of project problem solving based way of looking at sport, we looking at the learning process and how to get the kids engaged in that process and not let go of mastery. I'm not saying the skills aren't important. The affective, the sportspersonship of this, all of that's important, but it's the learning process that really matters, to put the kids in the context, or the things that they have to discuss about what's going on in the game. I've had a long time to think about, knowing that I have, with Steve and Judy, Steve Mitchell and Judy Oslin, the fortunate time of creating a curriculum or creating a way of thinking about it. And that's just one way. And one of the things we did do was think about how do you assess it and put it into game context. So that produced the game's performance assessment estimate. One of the things I think that needs to be looked at again is that, and I've said this before, but it's the engagement part. We have a performance part of that instrument, and I get that, but I think in order to get kids to come back to the sport, we need to understand their engagement. So they moved to the wrong space and missed the ball, but they moved to the space and got the ball. So that's the engagement part. That's the thing we need to reinforce for them to keep coming back to the game, to feel safe in the game. Because we know children leave the sport early in some levels because they don't feel like they're included in that. So I think the engagement part can be looked at. I think appreciation can be looked at more. And we've talked about this in the more recent version of our book about broadening the notion of appreciation to be not just about the rules, and that's the first intent. That was Barker and Thorpe's first intent, that the game, to get the students to appreciate that the game breaks down. What are we going to do? What rule do we need to do? How do we adjust the game to make it work for you? That's great. But then what else are the other things? The social aspects of the game, the social emotional learning aspects of the game. So a broader appreciation, notion of appreciation would be good for us to look at as we're working with our kids. But I do think that a shift away from mastery to a more learning process way of thinking helps this movement. And I think it's relevant, more relevant now than ever. We have a lot of lessons to keep teaching our kids, and in the context of, I'll just say it, what's going on in the world right now. And I think that's relevant, and it pains me to watch what's going on and to know we have to foster some wholeness in our children today as we watch them grow up. So that's one thing I was going to talk about. And then and the other question was around, can we influence policy? And I don't have a long statement on that, but I do want to say, I want to talk about, Alan talked about their Move Well Now. That's one way to get into the policy. That's why I'm bringing up the learning process and the mastery into like our developmentally inappropriate document in our standards in the US. We need to be at the table. We need to make sure that people understand that there's another way of thinking about learning beyond how sport is learned, beyond the idea of mastery. And one way to do that is to be at the table of the conversations around benchmarking and standards at levels of our states or our countries. And I do think there's a place for that. And then that can trickle into the local organizations, the state organizations, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think we have an obligation to make sure that games is still foregrounded, and what the lessons are that we can have, and that you can see it's been done. Well Now is a good example of that. There's pieces of that in there. So I just embrace that idea. And I just thought the way that conference was organized in New Zealand, thank you, Alan, is the strands of making sure that we can get with the grassroots level, and even more so, which was, I love the fact that it was just sort of more foregrounded with us know-it-all academics in the background, but yet having the opportunity to have the debates and discussions that we really need to have, because they were lively. They were lively. Even when we started out, is it relevant? It almost started out as a Debbie Downer, because we were like, well, it's really not relevant. But then we got a conversation going to talk about what we really can offer in a games-based approach, whichever one you choose to go up that mountain. Thank you. Aspasia.
Yes, thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
I feel a sense of duty after all these presentations and opinions. And also, I feel very happy and at home, both in AIESEP and in TGfU. So I'm going to share my perspective of what I felt after that is happening after our conference in New Zealand, and share some ideas that the TGfU SIG has a future for the future as a strategy to move forward. During the conference, I took my role as the chair of the TGfU SIG for the next 2 years. And this is something that makes me very happy, but also very anxious sometimes, so that to keep the field moving. So the whole discussion, my whole thinking shifted at the moment during a meeting when a colleague said that the narrative of what is happening in physical education during our times has changed. So this shift that he mentioned when we were talking about games and play made me think a lot. And I saw that happening also at the conference. I saw lots of presentations that were from multiple disciplines. And I said that what is happening during all the years, all the history behind TGfU needs to be combined now and saturate in a paradigm that is treated in a transdisciplinary way. I believe very much in the power of transdisciplinarity, and I saw that happening at the conference when different perspectives about what is games, what does it mean to play a game at the terms of physiology, at the terms of motor ability, at the terms of cognitive ability, and all these standards that are treated internationally in terms of what is learning through physical education and sport were happening through presentations at the conference. So my idea for the next years is to develop a strategy in terms of transdisciplinary learning and teaching through and within games, so that we can further enhance the power of games that is already happening. I believe very much in games, not because I am a member of the TGfU SIG, but the game is a very holistic experience. I think everyone has seen that happening, even if we have children in our homes, but also in our teaching, in our teacher education classes. From the first minute, everything is at the top in terms of interactions. So let's embrace this energy that games can bring and treat it in a multidisciplinary way. So I'm going to share some thoughts, and we can afterwards discuss on this based on what I perceive can be the future of working with games, since the narrative has changed, as my colleague said. So some context. I'm a senior lecturer in physical education, teacher education at the School of Physical Education and Sport Science at the University of Athens in Greece. And I am a minority in my department because it's a very sport science oriented department. So sport pedagogy and teaching generally need to be launched. So this is also an opportunity, working in a transdisciplinary way, and I found that really efficient during late years, working with my colleagues from different disciplines and working within games. So I believe in transdisciplinarity because for three main reasons. Within the literature and within what Alan and Linda has shared, lots of theories talk about games as complex systems. We see problem solving, problem creation, real-world applications, collaboration, narrative building within the games, and lots of social and emotional aspects. Games are really ideal context for promoting a systems thinking and a systems acting perspective. So this makes their power very big in order to be used as context for real life learning, apart from tactical learning and apart from physical education or sport learning. The next reason that I believe in the power of games is that the play that emerges through the game is always under development, under construction. Games are ecosystems, and we have seen this happening. Even a small minor change in the rules, especially if these rules are not fixed by the physical education teacher or the coach, then the game ecology changes completely. So this is another reason. A third reason is that games can be experiential learning laboratories, if we can talk about laboratory, because they are safe spaces. Everyone likes to play games, so it's a safe space, especially if the rules are modified in a developmentally appropriate way. Every student likes games. They engage, and by engages, they engage in a trial and error learning. So this is very facilitative in terms of holistic learning, and also this encourages a form of non-linear thinking. So in this sense, it's very experiential, it's very practical, it's very hands-on. And the third reason, this is my perspective, this is why I love games, is that everything that happens within the game is relationship-based. I believe a lot in relationship-based pedagogy and relationship-based learning, in embodied learning. And it's not just an abstract thing to talk about relationships. Relationships are tangible within the games. They are physically, socially, emotionally, cognitively. So all this energy, as I said before, is something that it is brings the value of games forward to be used in many different ways. So how can we design? If we said that we started today designing games for transdisciplinary learning, I won't say something that we don't already know, but it's important to put this as a strategy down and direct some future steps so as to produce policy and use the policy in a transdisciplinary way. For according to my perspective, we need to encourage transdisciplinary learning through and within and with the use of games. So game-based approaches can be transferred not only in out-of-school settings, but also within the school in different subjects, because in this way, the relationality of the students, the relationality of the school population will be strengthened. I am an advocate of problem producing and not problem solving. We need to produce games continuously through problems continuously through the games, because in this way we help students in their critical thinking. We don't need solutions, we need continuous problems, because this can be a trigger for their critical thinking. And we need to enable within games both reflective and affective learning. I think these sometimes are supposed to be happening without really and concretely doing work on this. So these are some steps that we can engage in the future. As a result, in order to summarize what I've said, I believe that as a strategy in the SIG and also within AIESEP context in pre-conference sessions, we will have a pre-conference session now in AIESEP in Florida on games as a transdisciplinary context. We can embrace this dynamic space that is continuously reproduced through games. We can foster critical thinking by problem producing, and not one solution, but many different solutions, adapting under pressure in real life scenarios and with a continuous change of the rules. We can incorporate affective learning, because these elements like conflict resolution and empathy are very easily worked within the game, because generally lots of things at an affect-based level are happening from the first minute of the game. We can work for games for social justice, because as I said at the beginning, the narrative of society has changed. At the moment, all over the world, things that are very unjust are happening. So we need to embrace the potential of games as socially just and inclusive systems and work by producing strategies, producing materials, producing policy based on this. We need to leverage technology, because as Linda said, technology is everywhere. So we can use some data coming from technology and wearables in order to enforce what we are producing as data. And we need to foster on experiences that will prioritize experiential learning, even from the very young ages of children, and work by expanding the power of games, not in the perceived TGfU sense, but games as context for experiential and embodied learning for students and kids of all ages. So that was my perspective. Thank you very much. I think it's time that we can engage in some discussions and the questions and answers as things that we can help us also think more concretely.
Thank you ever so much to our three wonderful speakers today. If you have questions, do you want to pop them in the chat? I'm going to pose just one question to you, Aspasia. You teased us by telling us that you're going to have a pre-conference session. Could you tell us a little bit more as to what we could expect from that session on that day?
Okay, I'm a teaser, I know that. The idea was exactly this. The idea came from the New Zealand conference that I saw transdisciplinary happening. So the pre-conference in Florida will focus on how we can engage in a game for teaching and learning purposes, and analyze the game and explore its potential through multiple disciplines. I mean, through a motor learning perspective, through a biomechanics perspective, through a social and emotional learning perspective, through an ethical perspective, conflict resolution. So many teachable moments in terms of different discipline perspectives will come up through the same game. And this is something that the teacher can do while working with other teachers at the school, because everything is relational. We can't just teach in physical education and expect that everyone afterwards plays a game at the field or outside the house and being ethical. We need to teach ethics. We need to teach social learning. We need to teach our students the biomechanics of movement in order to play safely and expect something through the games. We just don't need the game as a static context that is only focusing on tactics. Through the tactics and through the technical part, we can teach everything else.
Fabulous. That sounds like a really exciting session for everybody to be able to join when they come to Florida. Thank you for expanding more. You've had some really positive comments in the chat about how everybody's really excited in the direction that you're going, and how these trends are really what is needed and following what's happening. If you had to tell us, or maybe it's under development, you've again teased us by telling us there might be a name change. Have you is this a work in progress, or is this an ongoing debate that you're having? Can you give us a little bit more in terms of where you've got to? What are your struggles? What are your out there new names that you might have, please? Alan chuckled. Should we start with Alan?
I'm not sure. Well, it's the it was was it a proposal put at the AGM, and it was passed with the sort of the intent that the name should change. It's not been a sudden move. This has been something that has been going on for a little wee while, the discussions and a feeling. And it's really important to clarify that we're not trying to change the name of Teaching Games for Understanding. We're trying to change the name of the organization that sustains and fosters all of these different models. And in the past, there's been a little bit of confusion around that. And so in principle, I think at the AGM, there was real support for the notion that we need to change the name of the organization and find something that's appropriate. And has given the executive the green light to explore a little bit further and come back to propose some names. But we don't really have anything at the moment. We would love, well, I'm talking about we. I should hand it across to Aspasia, who's the chair. But I know they would love to have people, if they've got some really good ideas for names, to propose those. Sorry, Aspasia, you want to pick up that at all? Or Linda, sorry.
About the name change, there is lots of discussion happening before the conference and during the conference. And I don't know if we are a little bit unsure if it's nice to change the name, because TGfU is really, for me, I mean, I engage in the SIG because I like the teaching games for understanding a message. But as Alan said, we're not going to change the model. We're bringing a new perspective so as to make all the game-based approaches one united umbrella paradigm for working with games. And this doesn't mean that we are debating the value of each different perspective. We're just wanting to be stronger in terms of what we are doing within and via and through games, and what we seek about the future. So in order to make it relevant and inclusive to all people and to all specializations and to all practitioners, this is not an easy undertaking. That's why during the conference, we started a discussion about the name change, and then we said that we will continue the discussion. And that is why we are working with our International Advisory Board to produce some committees that at the national and international level will do something like a need analysis so that the broader name will align with what is culturally relevant in each country. And this is very difficult. I mean, we just can't an inclusive name for everything and for everyone, but it's really based on a vision to bring change and continue the history of the TGfU.
Thank you so much. In the chat, we've had some questions about how to engage teachers rather than academics in this discussion, and how will you open up the conversation to ensure that the teachers are involved, or are you doing that already? And if so, could you tell us a little bit more about how you're engaging them?
This is a question, a general question. Alan, Linda? If I talk from, if I can share my opinion, I think it's mainly for teachers, because coaches are also teachers in a way. So I think it's a teacher-based perspective, and the transdisciplinary focus on game-based approaches is something that teachers can use both within the school practice and as a transfer out of school. I personally am very focused on pedagogy and teaching. So my impression is how can we make it more relevant to teachers? I agree with this, because teachers are a big force, and they have the opportunity to influence people from students from 6 years old to 18 years old. So the power of education lies in a way in their hands. So I think working with teachers, and as I saw it happening during the conference in New Zealand, the day that was Advocate for Teachers, they had a strong voice in what is happening with and through games. Even though sometimes teachers are bombarded with guidelines, do this, do that, this perspective, the other perspective, the standards, assessment, and whatever, and they feel disempowered, I think they care for their profession. And through their care is what comes afterwards as an influence. So I think for us in the SIG, we expect that we're going to launch some webinars and some material that is going to be helpful for teachers. And as I said, given that we want to make our International Advisory Board nationally relevant, already in some countries, these initiatives are translated in the local language. I mean, at the moment I'm running online professional development webinars for physical education teachers, and I have 400 people attending online from all over Greece, introduced to game-based approaches. This is one part of the professional development webinar. So it's a step-by-step process that will also be launched through the SIG.
Fabulous. Great to hear that you've got so many engaged in your webinars. Does anybody else have a question that they don't want to put in the chat, but they'd like to say it out loud instead?
A comment. Can I make a comment?
Oh, yes. Sorry, Linda. Yeah.
So I see Ash Casey has made a statement about, the confusion, to my point about Ultimate taking so long, and then moving to having TGfU be there, and then all of a sudden taking it away. Will that be confusing to an audience? Clearly, you can see just by Alan, Linda, and Aspasia, the debate's going to continue for a bit. But I will say that from my perspective, and I know it sounds kind of, I don't know, I just really believe that a games-based approaches is a better brand, because for me, the game lures the teacher, lures the ideas, and from teaching or coaching perspective. And I'm not sure, I mean, even early on when Steve, Judy, and I were working together and working with the teachers to try to make these teacher proof or kid proof lessons that still held some of the principles of TGfU, as we were thinking that, we would talk about teaching for understanding, teaching games for understanding, and they'd be like, what? So I'm a flip-flopper on this. I embrace, I agree with Alan. We don't ever want to lose the principles of it, but also we don't have a brand that's like, oh yeah, I understand that. So I'm coming from a little bit of a marketing issue, and I know it's about education, so please don't take this the wrong way, but I do think we want to capture the group that really embraces, because it's the passionate people. You got to go with the movers and the shakers. So how do we get the movers and the shakers there? And so I think foregrounding the games part, and also embracing all the ways to get there is an important task we have in the future. So that's my 2 cents.
I love the concept of embracing all the ways to get there. That just feels so inclusive and welcoming to everybody who might
and it holds true to Joy's. Well, I mean, this is, yes, it's about legacies and people before us, and Alan, I mean, Bunker and Thorpe and Allman and all the teachers that were there at that conference, love them to death, absolutely love them to death, and embrace their legacy. And so we just need to keep those legacies moving forward. And one of Joy's legacies was fair play and inclusion. And I just think that that's one that I never want to see us lose. So end of story, and I still miss it.
Following on from some of the comments on the chat, is highlighting that there's a need to transfer the research that we do in the field with some concrete examples to then convince the teachers to then change their habits, and that perhaps academics are too wedded to the particular brands and they can contribute to some of the confusion themselves, and that we need to come over these hurdles to have then effective implementation. Is there any more questions from the group that is online that you would wish to say out loud rather than have in the chat? I hope I've summarized the chat for everybody clearly enough. Please highlight if I haven't.
If I may share a word about how we're going to convince teachers, this is my daily struggle with how I'm going to convince my teachers, but I think there are 2 answers. I'm speaking from experience. One is students' enthusiasm. I mean, the teachers that have applied something like TGfU, a game-based approach, and have succeeded because they believed in it, have really excited students, really transformed students. We've seen students that were bystanders just being in the front and launching every opportunity to play the game. And the next powerful thing is teacher communities. Whenever I worked with teacher communities implementing a version of game-based approaches, this was a huge success in terms of what has been transferred as a vision, as passion, as knowledge, as being resilient to the pressures of its educational system. So there are some ways that are not so direct, and I agree that sometimes academics are very strict and structured and isolated in their offices, perceiving that everything is happening with the pressure of the button. But if you just put yourself in a school field and talk with teachers and empathize with what is happening, then this is also a shift to your perspective, and you just start to craft the game-based approach that you have in your mind from your academic desk to what is happening at school. So this is also a success. There are small successes that are every day happening with game-based approaches, even though academically don't have a big representation or statistically significant changes. These small changes are very worthy, and that's why qualitative research with case studies or self-studies can also be a paradigm for working academically with game-based approaches in the future.
Fabulous. Alan, Linda, do you have any final comments before we close?
No, it's been a pleasure to be here, though. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Linda. Alan?
It's been just a wonderful opportunity to have a chat. So I really appreciate the chance to talk a little bit about games, and obviously it's a passion, and invite any of the participants if they want to email or discuss it any further. I'd love to be able to talk to anyone who would like to further discussion. But thank you for tonight. Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you so much to all of you for sharing the future of teaching games for understanding. If you go to the AIESEP websites and look at the special interest group, all of the contact details for the special interest group are on there. So in case you suddenly go, oh, I want to contact, and Alan has teased us but hasn't told us where, that is where I would suggest that you head to in terms of being able to contact this wonderful special interest group. Thank you so much for today. I am going to do just a throw forwards to our next Connect. Our next Connect looks at the sports health education research community from Edith Cowan University, and they will be joining us not quite in March, but on the 4th of April. So please save the date, and more information will be coming out about that shortly. Thank you everybody who's joined us. Thank you everybody who's listened and watched online. And we look forward to seeing what happens at the Florida Pre-Congress and finding out more about it when you tell us afterwards. Thank you so much again, and thanks for everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.